Hi students, today we will be graphing sine and cosine functions. I mentioned this last week, but I want to remind you what the graph of sine and cosine look like. Sine starts with the middle at 0. Cosine starts with the highest point at 0, and then one period ends at 2 pi. One period ends at 2 pi, but starting from the high point, low to high, but middle, high, low, back to middle for sine. This is sine, this is cosine. They are the same thing except just shifted to the left or to the right, however you want to think about it. But it continues to repeat as a wave. All right, let's take a look at this question here. Graph the function for cosine. So to better show you, I'm going to use IXL and graph it there so you could see how to use the graphs in IXL. So here in IXL, there are the two graphs at the bottom. One is sine, one is cosine. Remember, if the center is at 0, 0, it is sine. If the highest point is at the center, then it is cosine. So since this is cosine, we'll use the graph on the right. And since the amplitude here is 4, the A value is 4, we drag cosine up to 4. And that is how you graph it. So here's another problem. This is with sine. It is the same as cosine, except the graph you pick at the bottom will be the one on the left, because it's sine. But we find everything else the same way. Remember, when you get questions wrong on IXL, they show you how to do it, and their explanation is really good. I'm going to show you how they explain it here. So the amplitude here is 3, because 3 sine, that's number in front of sine. You move it from the original sine graph, the highest point, from 1, you move it up to 3. And that is how you regraph the sine function to make the amplitude 3. Next, to find the period, you have 2 pi divided by absolute value of b, which is 2 pi divided by 2 over 3, because that's the value in front of the x. Once you simplify that, you'll get 3 pi. This means that the length of one period will be 3 pi. Normally, from one maximum to another, the distance of one period here in the original graph is 2 pi, but we will need to stretch this out to be 3 pi. On this graph, it's easiest to see one period from the center at negative 3 pi over 2 all the way to 3 pi over 2. If you count that, that will be the distance of 3 pi. So 1 pi, 2 pi, and 3 pi. Just make sure that when you do this, your center point right there at 0, 0 still stays the same. I noticed that IXL, I had a hard time dragging it, so I often had to move it back. So stretch it out so that one period is 3 pi, but then make sure your center is still at 0, 0. Now to find the phase shift, we have negative c divided by absolute value of b, which is negative 2, so it will become positive 2 divided by absolute value of 2 over 3, which is 3 pi. Now the phase shift is how much we move to the right. We'll have to move it to the right by 3 pi, and since one period is 3 pi, as we calculated earlier, it means you didn't move at all, because if you move one period, remember it repeats again, so therefore you just leave the graph like that and you are all done.